Chapter 8. Are there any other leads? The long days of searching for a lead, a clue, anything, stretched on for weeks. Thanksgiving came and went. So had Yom Kippur. The thousands of Chicago area Jews who gathered on that most solemn evening of the year had nothing to atone for this time around. They had suffered enough. Their grief was their ongoing atonement. It was the two still missing men who had much to atone for. But the specter of the Schneider case lay heavy on the minds of many at synagogues that night as cantors sung again the old and mournful strains of the Kol Nidre, the traditional wailing and bittersweet statement at the beginning of Yom Kippur. With the incantation of the Kol Nidre, the bonds and the entanglements and many engagements of the past may have been dissolved and gone. The slate may have been washed clean, but something remained unsolved. Something remained a stain and a heavy weight on the hearts of Chicago's Jewish community, and it would remain there for a while. Meanwhile, as the weather got colder, Brad found more sensible excuses to spend time at many of the warm taverns he had marked on his map. At each he identified himself to the bartender and asked about the night of the Schneider murders and about the possibility that a pair of men may have come into the establishment to bide their time. And at every bar he got the same answers. "I don't pay that much attention to who comes in here. Most of my customers want to be lost and forgotten anyway." And to make matters worse, as the weeks moved on, memories of that night began to fade as Christmas neared. Then Brad hit pay dirt. On Wells Avenue near Scott, he found a bartender who did remember that night. His memories were quite vivid, and for a special reason. The bartender was named Al Bennett. He had worked at the Wells Inn for 20 years. As a matter of fact, the day the Schneiders were murdered was the 20th anniversary of his first night there. The owner had arranged a surprise party. Because it wasn't a private party, the bar was still open. Other people went in and out. And that turned out to be a lucky break in the search for the names of the killers in the Schneider case. At Bennett's party, someone had brought a karaoke machine, and through the night, horrible disco karaoke music blared. "It was worse than that stupid jukebox," Bennett told Brad. The whining din from the karaoke made normal speech nearly impossible. Bennett thought he would lose his voice from the yelling, at least by the time the night was over. The old Wells Inn had seldom seen such a crazy or more raucous night. A part-time bartender had been called in to work that night so the other employees could treat Al Bennett to an evening during which he wouldn't have to wait on people. He would be served. Bennett sat in booth 6, halfway down one of the side walls of the pub. Nearly all the other booths were occupied by employees and Bennett's friends who were there. But as the night dragged on and more people brought in wrapped gifts and good wishes, Bennett began to realize there was something really loud going on in the adjacent booth 7. It had to be loud, he said, in order to be heard over all the other noise. Although he told Brad that he never got a good look at the two men sitting in booth 7, he would remember their voices. One of the men he recounted sounded as if he had been hired to be in a gangster movie. It's funny, but he sounded more like Edward G. Robinson than Edward G. Robinson did. I couldn't figure out if the guy really talked that way or he lived in some kind of fantasy world. We serve a lot of kooks in here, you know. and the other man spoke in a strong voice, but hesitated a lot, as if he had a mental problem or a speech problem. Only guessing. Anyway, both sounded odd in their own ways. "No wonder you remember all of that," Brad said to Bennett with a smile. Well, there was one thing that the gangster-sounding guy said several times, or maybe I should say yelled out several times. It's funny that I didn't find any connection with those folks to the ones who were killed until I tied the two thoughts together. "What did he say?" Brad asked urgently. "He must have said a dozen times, 'You shouldn't have thrown it into the bushes. You shouldn't have thrown it into the bushes.' He just repeated that over and over again. 'The cops are going to find it.' Now I realize he must have been talking about the tire iron I read about in the newspaper. And their visit to my bar was memorable for another reason. I also remember the trash they left behind." "Trash?" "Well, just crap from that long evening and their drinks. And one other thing, 2 or 3 of the beer glasses had to be thrown away." "Did they break them? Why was that?" "Well, we use pretty expensive beer glasses here. They have etchings on them, Chicago baseball, football logos, even a photo of Al Capone. The tiny grooves in the glasses were so smeared with a caked-on kind of orange paint they couldn't be cleaned. And something else, the napkins had the paint on them. I wish I'd known that night what I know now. None of that stuff would have been thrown away. Does that help you in any way?" Brad quickly replied, "You're a prince. I need to throw that stuff into the mix. I think you've hit some important points. I can't tell you how grateful I am that you remembered all of that and shared it. You deserve a medal. Now I've got something to work on." Then Brad had a sudden thought. He couldn't believe he had nearly walked out without asking, "Hey, did they pay with cash or a credit card?" Actually, funny you should bring that up. I remember Kerry Dean, the guy who filled in for me that night, the part-time bartender. He came over and asked me to sign off on a bar tab he was holding. The 2 really loud guys wanted to use a type of credit card he had never seen. It was kind of a personal gift card from a grocery in Idaho. It was a gift card, but it functioned like a credit card. They did have identification, so I okayed the use of the credit card. So they didn't pay by cash. They used that funky credit card. But you did get a good look at them. No, they were at the bar with their backs to me when Kerry Dean came to my table, asking for me to okay the card. I guess I really messed this one up, Mr. Gibson." "No, Al, you did the normal thing, but you may have provided a lead that could crack this case wide open. Do you still have the record of that credit card transaction?" "Oh, God, I'm sure it's still in the office somewhere, but it might take a while. I'll have to convince the owner to give someone access to go through the records so you don't have to get a search warrant." Suddenly, Al Bennett got a kind of wicked smile on his face. He went on, "You know what, Mr. Gibson? I just might take on that project myself. I remember how upset my wife was when she watched the TV report of the murders. When they showed the photo of the couple, my wife started screaming. She'd once gone to a regional Red Cross meeting at their house. I owe this to that poor couple. When I tell my wife I'm going to become an underground detective, she'll be thrilled. Say, give me your phone number, Mr. Gibson. Let me work on this. I promise I'll get some results. This might be fun." Brad thanked Mr. Bennett and then went home, knowing that finally some progress was being made. The next morning at work, Brad called Judge Shake and told him about the new information. Shake was thrilled, although he wished the bartender had gotten a better look at the men. Shake suggested that Brad not wait for the bartender to call, but to regularly call the bartender and check on his progress. Every day or so, Brad called the bartender, and each time the answer was the same. I haven't figured out a way yet to get into the credit card records, but I'll call you. On Friday, the call came. $96.50. Quite a bar tab for our little tiny joint here. But who were the guys? Brad yelled, nearly angrily. Oh, I'm sorry. The card was registered in the name of a Bill Birkin. Sounds fishy to me, Brad said. Well, Mr. Gibson, I'm not sure I was any help, but it's the best I can do. You are the best. I can't tell you how important this is, Brad said. Nearly forgetting to retrieve it, Brad asked Bennett to read him the credit card number. He wrote it down. It was something he didn't dare lose. He wrote it on the back of a McDonald's receipt and put it in his wallet. He stopped by to see Dolores before she left for the weekend. After telling Dolores about his trip to the bar, the longtime librarian said, Brad, couldn't you check with one of the senior police reporters like Old Man Bowling and see if you can get the police to run a make on that name? Bill Birkin. What an alias. Yes, good idea. I hate, though, that I'll have to wait until Monday to do it, but I do know Old Man Bowling wasn't in today. He's known for taking 3-day weekends, but we'll get a fresh start on Monday. Brad was thrilled. At least after all these weeks and months, it would seem that there was some tangible ties to the murder in the Schneider case. Now to follow that trail. Brad went to his desk and just thought about how coincidences can play a large part in investigative work. Had Al Bennett not had an anniversary the night of the murder? Had the killers not picked that bar? Had they not paid the tab with an odd and very noticeable out-of-state credit card? Had they not talked so loudly or smeared orange paint all around? Had Judge Shake not moved to Chicago? Join me again for the next part of Return to Nuremberg.